Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well tonight. After a long, exhausting day, nothing heals the mind and body quite like a peaceful night's sleep. But when sleep doesn't come easily, everything feels heavier. The stress, the noise, the thoughts we try to escape. Remember when we were kids, how our mothers would hold us close, gently stroke our hair, and whisper stories that slowly carried us into dreams. Tonight, I want to bring back that same comfort, that same feeling of being safe, warm, and cared for. But these aren't made-up bedtime stories. These are real, timeless stories from history. Stories that calm your mind, slow down your heartbeat, and guide you softly into deep, restful sleep, while teaching you something new about our world. So before you place your phone beside your pillow, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so every night you can fall asleep peacefully while discovering a new chapter of history. Now, take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and without wasting any more time, let's begin tonight's story. In the stillness of ancient Rome, just before dawn stretched across the marble temples and the echoing streets, history was already writing the final chapter of a man whose ambition reshaped a world. This was a Rome living between two heartbeats, between the final days of the Republic and the rise of imperial destiny. And at the center of that fragile moment stood one man, Gaius Julius Caesar. This is the story of the secret letters, written in fear, in hope, and in treachery, that exposed the final betrayal leading to Caesar's death. Letters that circulated quietly in the dim-lit corridors of the Senate. Letters that crossed the empire's borders carried by trembling hands. Letters that revealed the dangerous ambitions of men who smiled at Caesar in daylight and plotted against him under moonlight. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the quiet, steady pace of history guide you. Allow the sounds of ancient Rome, the sandals brushing against stone, the low rumble of distant marketplaces, the murmur of political whispers, to settle around your imagination. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and enter the final days of Caesar with a calm heart. This is not just a recounting of events. It is an emotional journey through the uncertainty, the fear, the alliances, and the betrayals that shaped the destiny of the Western world. Rome, in the winter of 45 BCE, looked peaceful from the outside. The Tiber River flowed with the same calm rhythm it had known for centuries. The Forum bustled with commerce. Marble columns gleamed in the late afternoon sun. Soldiers returned from distant campaigns. Market stalls carried the same scents of olives, wine, and fresh bread. But beneath that outward normalcy, a deeper storm was building. The city's heartbeat was unsteady, its future uncertain, and its leaders uneasy. Caesar had won the civil war. He had crossed the Rubicon. He had marched on Rome. He had defeated Pompey. He had pursued him to Egypt. He had reshaped alliances, toppled governments, and returned home adorned with triumph after triumph. The Senate had rewarded him with honors, far too many honors, and with fear disguised as respect. But victory, Caesar knew, came with a price. That price was the hatred that grew silently in the men who once claimed the Republic as theirs. Every evening, in the privacy of his residence, Caesar read letters from all across Rome. Some congratulated him. Some begged for favors. But a small subset, delivered discreetly, without signatures, warned him of conspirators. They warned him of senators who smiled during the day and sharpened their daggers at night. They warned him of betrayal quietly growing around him like ivy around stone. Most of these letters Caesar ignored, not because he believed himself safe, but because he believed himself destined. In his mind, fate had its own path, and fate had chosen him. But one letter, one quiet piece of parchment delivered at dawn, would soon change everything. The first letter arrived in February, only weeks before the Ides of March. A low-ranking soldier, breath visible in the cool morning air, approached Caesar's villa with an expression that mixed anxiety and confusion. He carried a small wax-sealed note, delivered to him anonymously at the barracks the previous night. For Caesar's eyes only, the note read, penned in a hurried hand. Inside, Caesar sat at a long table covered with maps, scrolls, and statues of conquered territories. He was making plans for his grand campaign into Parthia, an expedition he believed would not only bring him military glory, but also secure his legacy for all time. When the soldier handed him the note, Caesar thanked him with the calm dignity he always maintained. He broke the seal, unrolled the parchment, and read the short message. You are surrounded by men you call friends, but who call you tyrant. Beware the Senate. Beware the Ides. The wording was simple. The tone was urgent, and the warning was clear. Caesar looked up from the letter, his expression unreadable. He folded the parchment and placed it on the table beside him. Tell no one of this, he said. The soldier nodded and left quietly. In the silence of that morning, Caesar sat alone with the message, running his fingers gently against the grain of the parchment. Somewhere deep inside himself, he felt the faint stir of unease. But the unease passed quickly, replaced by something else, confidence, perhaps even arrogance. After all, Caesar had faced armies, storms, and assassins before. Letters were nothing new. Threats were nothing new. And betrayal? That was as old as Rome itself. But he placed the letter into a wooden chest, a chest reserved for the most dangerous correspondence, and sealed it. He should have paid more attention. The Senate was becoming a theater of strained smiles and hidden motives. Men who once cheered Caesar's victories now debated quietly about what his continued power meant for Rome. They whispered that Caesar wanted to be king, not dictator, not consul, king. The word itself was poison in Roman politics. To wear a crown was to betray the republic. And in this uneasy atmosphere, the conspirators began to move. Marcus Junius Brutus, respected, quiet, principled, yet torn between loyalty to Caesar and loyalty to the Republic, received the first secret warning from his allies: choose your Rome. It was not signed. It didn't need to be. Gaius Cassius Longinus, sharp, bitter, and resentful of Caesar's power, started collecting allies quietly, choosing his words with care, like a man placing knives into the hands of others. Decimus Brutus, one of Caesar's closest companions, had begun to attend small gatherings in dimly lit villas where whispers carried more weight than laws. Every man acted in the open during the day, but at night, their steps grew quieter, their conversations shorter, their meetings more clandestine. Someone in these meetings was writing to Caesar. Someone was warning him about the very men sitting beside him in the Senate. Someone was afraid that their actions, if successful, would plunge Rome into new civil war. Those letters, one after another, began reaching Caesar, and each one was more detailed than the last. Weeks later, Caesar opened another parchment delivered secretly just after sunset. This time, the letter was longer, the handwriting more careful, the tone more personal, and unlike the first warning, this one named names. Brutus is not your enemy, but he is surrounded by those who are. Cassius plots openly. Trebonius hesitates, but he listens. Cimber is restless. Decimus attends meetings without you. They whisper of saving Rome. They whisper of blood. Do not go to the Senate on the Ides. The letter trembled slightly in Caesar's hands as he read. He let out a long, slow breath. The oil lamps flickered softly around him, casting warm, golden light across the walls. Outside, Rome was quiet. Most citizens were asleep, but Caesar remained awake, pacing gently across the floor, reading the letter again and again. His mind drifted, not to fear, but to something else, sorrow. It wasn't Cassius who troubled him. Cassius had always been jealous. It wasn't Trebonius or Cimber either. He expected ambition from them. What troubled him was Brutus. Brutus, the son of Servilia, a woman Caesar had once loved. Brutus, the man Caesar trusted almost like family. Brutus, the idealist who wanted a pure republic, even though Rome had long since outgrown purity. The letter shook him because it centered on Brutus, because it expressed doubt about Brutus, and because it revealed Caesar's greatest vulnerability, his heart. He placed this letter next to the first. 2 warnings, 2 signs, 2 moments where fate whispered gently in his ear. And still, Caesar told no one. Rome could feel the tension. Merchants in the forum spoke in low tones about politics. Soldiers stationed outside the Senate stood a little straighter, sensing a shift in the wind. Even the slaves who swept the marble floors whispered among themselves that something was coming, something heavy, something inevitable. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, noticed the weight on his shoulders. She watched him leave for meetings with a softness in her eyes, knowing he carried the burdens of a world that was changing too fast. She often found him awake long after midnight, standing near the window, staring out at the moonlit rooftops of the eternal city. The people of Rome loved Caesar. They loved the stability he brought. They loved his generosity. They loved his boldness. Crowds followed him wherever he walked. But love could not protect him from daggers. Nor could loyalty. Nor could destiny. Because destiny was already written. And somewhere in the cadence of Rome's nightly breeze, destiny was quietly unfolding. In the weeks leading to the Ides of March, the letters multiplied. They arrived through messengers, slipped beneath doors, or placed quietly upon Caesar's desk in the Curia. Some were detailed, some were vague, some were written with elegance, others in trembling hands. But all shared the same warning: you are not safe in the Senate. Caesar began to read them more slowly, as if listening for a voice behind the ink. He was not a man easily shaken, but something about the volume of warnings, the consistency of their tone, began to settle inside him like a cold presence. He kept the letters hidden in the same small wooden chest, locking it each night before sleep. There were moments, brief, passing moments, when he wondered if the republic he was trying to stabilize could ever truly be saved. He had ended civil wars, passed reforms, strengthened Rome's structure, and brought peace to regions shattered by conflict. But for every solution he offered, new enemies emerged. He could feel them watching him in the Senate. He could feel the air change when he entered. He could feel the tension rise whenever he spoke. But Caesar was a man accustomed to danger. In his youth, he had faced pirates, illness, storms, and battlefields. He had survived enemies who sought to destroy him. Compared to those threats, letters seemed trivial. Yet he could not shake the feeling that he was being surrounded, not by armies, but by intentions. Marcus Junius Brutus was a man caught between two worlds. To understand the tragedy of Caesar's final days, one must understand the emotional storm raging within Brutus. Brutus believed in the Republic. He believed in its traditions. He believed in its fragile structure. And he believed that his duty, his sacred obligation, was to protect it. But Brutus also admired Caesar. He respected him. In quieter years, he even loved him in a way a younger man admires the strength of an older mentor. Caesar had spared Brutus after Pharsalus, despite Brutus fighting on Pompey's side. Caesar had forgiven him, honored him, and trusted him. And yet, the pressure around Brutus grew. Cassius whispered to him. Cimber whispered to him. Trebonius whispered to him. Decimus whispered to him. Dozens whispered to him. And each whisper carried the same message. Rome is dying, and Caesar is killing it. Brutus began receiving letters of his own. Anonymous notes slipped into his home, urging him to act. They referenced his ancestors, the Brutus who expelled Rome's last king centuries earlier. They invoked honor, duty, and destiny. They told him that history was watching him, judging him, weighing him. One letter read, "Would your ancestors approve of your silence while Caesar crowns himself king?" Brutus held that letter for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. Across the city, Caesar read letters warning him of Brutus. And Brutus read letters demanding he stand against Caesar. Two men, walking toward the same tragedy, guided by ink and fear. One evening, a gathering took place in the seaside town of Antium. It was peaceful there, far from the noise of Rome, far from the crowds, far from Caesar's influence. The villa overlooked the sea, and its walls seemed to hold the wind in a soft, steady embrace. Inside, the conspirators met. Brutus arrived with his usual calm expression, though his heart was heavy. Cassius was there already, analyzing every detail of the room with sharp eyes. Decimus came next, carrying himself with confidence. Trebonius followed, speaking in low tones as he greeted the others. The candles flickered as they sat down to eat. Wine was poured. Bread was divided. And beneath the gentle sound of waves breaking against the rocks, the most fateful conversation in Roman history began. Cassius leaned forward. "Rome is suffering, Brutus," he said quietly. "Caesar behaves like a king. If we do not act, the Republic will be nothing but a memory." Brutus said nothing at first. He stared down at his cup, feeling the weight of Rome's expectations pressing upon him. Decimus added, "He trusts us. That is why the time to strike is now." The table fell silent. Outside, the sea murmured gently, as if nature itself were listening. Brutus finally spoke. "Is there no other way?" Cassius shook his head slowly. "There is no law that can restrain a man who is the law." Brutus looked up. The flickering light revealed the conflict in his eyes. And in that moment, Long before the Ides of March, Brutus made his choice. He chose Rome. He chose duty. He chose the conspirators. And his signature was not ink on parchment. It was silence. While conspirators plotted by the sea, Caesar's knights in Rome grew uneasy. Calpurnia, his wife, noticed the shift immediately. Caesar, who once slept with the calm confidence of a soldier, now woke several times each night, sometimes startled by dreams, sometimes startled by silence. He would sit at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the moonlit floor without speaking. Calpurnia would rise quietly, place a gentle hand on his shoulder, and whisper, "Come back to bed, my love." But Caesar did not return easily. One night, he told her, in a soft, trembling voice, "I dreamt of pillars falling, of voices crying out, of blood carried by the wind." Calpurnia felt fear coil around her heart. She begged him not to attend Senate meetings for several days. She urged him to rest, to stay home, to let the politicians handle their affairs without him. But Caesar believed the dreams were nothing more than the pressure of leadership, the weight of Rome placed upon one man's shoulders. In sleepless nights, his mind replayed the warnings he received, the faces of senators he trusted, the tone of their words, the slight shifts in their behavior. Sometimes he opened the chest of secret letters and read them again, not out of fear, but out of contemplation. There was a softness in his eyes, a reflective quality, as if he sensed the chapters of his life closing one by one. The third letter arrived with unusual urgency. It was placed directly into Caesar's palm by an unknown young man. The messenger said nothing. He simply bowed, handed Caesar the note, and vanished into the crowd. Caesar unfolded the parchment. This letter was different from the others. Bolder, more emotional, almost desperate. It read, "You believe Brutus incapable of betrayal, but it is through him they will strike. Do not attend the Senate. They mean to kill you there." This moment, more than any other, carved itself into Caesar's mind. He whispered the words under his breath. "Through Brutus." Caesar closed his eyes slowly, letting the weight of the message settle over him. The idea that Brutus, the son of his former lover, the man he pardoned, the man he trusted, could be used as the dagger that would take his life, it was almost unthinkable. For the first time, Caesar felt something he had not felt in many years. A quiet, growing sadness. Not fear, not panic, sadness. The sadness of a man who realized that the world he was trying to build could not be built without breaking the hearts of those he loved. He placed the letter in the chest, but this time he lingered. His hand rested on the edge of the wooden box, his eyes drifting across the room as if searching for answers he knew would never come. The room felt colder that night, the oil lamps dimmer, the shadows longer. Caesar knew the tide was changing, and for the first time, he did not push the thought away. Rome felt like a city waiting for something to break. The Senate carried on with its routines, but tension followed every senator like a shadow. The markets buzzed, yet beneath the laughter, merchants exchanged worried glances. Soldiers sharpened their blades a little too often. Slaves moved with unusual quietness. Even the wind seemed to change, moving more slowly through the olive trees, sighing as it passed the marble statues that lined the forum. Rumors drifted through the city like smoke. Caesar plans to leave for Parthia. He wants to be king. He will not give up power. He must be stopped. Across Rome, everyone sensed something was coming, but no one could name it. Caesar felt it too. Every time he walked into the Curia, he sensed eyes lingering on him. Every time he spoke, he heard silence following his words. Every time he looked at Brutus, he saw conflict behind the younger man's gentle expression. Life continued as normal, but nothing was normal. The Republic was holding its breath, waiting for a single moment that would decide its fate. On the evening before the Ides of March, Caesar received his final letter. It was written in a sharp, rapid script, almost as if the writer was running out of time. Caesar opened it while sitting near a warm oil lamp, the golden light flickering against his face. The letter read, "They will kill you tomorrow. Do not go to the Senate. You must not ignore this. The plot is set. The knives are ready." The words were heavy, heavy enough to still Caesar's breath. He closed the letter slowly. There was no anger in his expression, no surprise, no fear, only acceptance. He sat in silence for a long time, the quiet room filled with the faint crackle of the oil lamp. He laid the letter gently beside him and leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes drifting upward. It was here, alone, in this soft pool of lamplight, that Caesar understood something profoundly human. A man can conquer nations, can command legions, can reshape a world, but he cannot escape the destiny written in the hearts of those he trusts. He whispered to himself, "If this is the end Rome requires, then so be it." And with that thought, Caesar let the room fall into silence. Outside, the wind shifted again. History was approaching. Quietly, inevitably, fatally. The morning of the Ides of March began with an unsettling stillness. Rome, usually loud with carts, shouts, animals, and the restless movement of tens of thousands, felt muted. The city seemed to wake cautiously, as if sensing something heavy moving beneath the surface. The sky was pale, washed with the soft gray of early morning. Thin mist clung to the ground between stone streets and drifted around the pillars of temples and public buildings. Even the birds sounded hesitant, their songs fading quickly into the cool air. Inside Caesar's villa, the quiet felt even heavier. He woke before sunrise, not from noise, but from an unfamiliar sensation, a kind of internal pull, as if some silent force was urging him toward the day he had been trying to ignore. He sat up slowly. The room was dim. The air was cool. And for several moments, Caesar simply sat in stillness, listening to the heartbeat of the house. Distant footsteps, a stirring slave, a creak in the wooden hall, a faint breeze moving the window curtain. But underneath those small sounds was something else, an emotional hum, a quiet warning, almost like the echo of the letters he kept locked away. When he finally stood, he felt the weight of his age more clearly than usual. His shoulders ached. His knees felt stiff. There was a heaviness in his chest, not pain, just a strange emotional pressure that he couldn't quite explain. He dressed slowly, calmly, deliberately, like a man preparing not for the Senate, but for something more final. Calpurnia woke with a gasp, her chest rising sharply as though she had been pulled from a deep, suffocating sea. Sweat clung to her forehead. Her breath trembled as she tried to steady herself. Caesar turned immediately. "What is it?" he asked softly. Calpurnia's hands shook as she reached for him. "I dreamt of you," she whispered. I dreamt. I dreamt something terrible. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could continue. I saw you lying in my arms, but you were bleeding. You were pale, and the walls of our home were dripping with blood. I heard voices crying your name, but they sounded far away. Caesar, I felt it. I felt that you were taken from me. Her voice cracked. It felt real. Caesar felt a deep, painful softness in his chest. He brought his hand gently to her cheek, trying to calm her, but inside, her words struck him with the force of prophecy. Calpurnia continued, "Don't go today. Please. Stay home. Cancel the Senate meeting. I beg you." There was no dramatic flair in her request. No desperate theatrical tone. Only raw fear. The kind of fear that love creates. The fear of losing someone irreplaceable. Caesar had faced death on battlefields countless times, but he had never seen Calpurnia look at him like this. Her eyes carried the same warning as the letters, but this time, the message was delivered with trembling hands, a breaking voice, and all the emotion of a wife terrified of becoming a widow. For a moment, just a moment, Caesar considered listening. When Decimus Junius Brutus arrived at Caesar's home, he arrived with confidence, his footsteps steady, his expression calm. The conspirators had chosen him for a reason. Caesar trusted him deeply. Some said Caesar trusted Decimus even more than Brutus himself. A servant announced his arrival, and Decimus stepped into the atrium, where Caesar and Calpurnia stood together. Calpurnia's expression tightened when she saw him. She sensed something in his presence, something hidden beneath his polite posture. Decimus smiled, warmly, reassuringly. "Caesar," he said, "the Senate waits for you. Today is important. The final preparations for the campaign in Parthia must be approved." Caesar glanced at Calpurnia, then back at Decimus. "I may not attend," Caesar said quietly. "My wife has had troubling dreams." Decimus paused just long enough to appear thoughtful, not long enough to appear nervous. "My dear Caesar," he said with soft confidence, "you know as well as I do that the Senate already accuses you of being too influenced by your wife. If you stay home today for a dream, they will laugh at you. They will say you have grown weak. They will claim you fear superstition more than the responsibilities of Rome." Calpurnia's face tightened with anger. That should not matter. Decimus bowed respectfully to her, but his words struck at Caesar, not at her. "The senators will believe you are grasping for royal power if you avoid the meeting. They will claim you feel too important to attend." Caesar inhaled slowly. Decimus pressed gently with one final blow. "You must not give them more reason to doubt your intentions. Come to the Senate. Let them see your strength." Calpurnia shook her head. "Please," she whispered to Caesar. "Please don't go." Caesar felt torn, pulled between the trembling hands of his wife and the steady, persuasive voice of a man he trusted. Decimus watched Caesar carefully, waiting for the moment he knew would come. Caesar exhaled, long, slow, full of resignation. "Very well," he said quietly. "I will go." Calpurnia closed her eyes in anguish. Decimus bowed again, hiding the victory flickering in his expression. As Caesar prepared to leave, the air in the villa felt thick, almost harder to breathe. Servants moved quietly, sensing tension. The walls echoed with a strange, hollow stillness. Caesar walked with steady steps, but his mind drifted inward. The letters, the warnings, Calpurnia's dream. The uneasy silence in the Senate. The sudden shift in familiar faces. The unusual quiet of the morning. All the signs had been there. Yet he moved forward, not as a man unaware of danger, but as a man choosing his path despite it. At the entrance of the villa, Calpurnia took his hands. "If you must go," she whispered, "promise me you will be careful." Caesar brought one hand to her cheek, his expression warm and sorrowful. "I promise I will return." It was a promise he meant when he said it. A promise he believed in. A promise that fate had no intention of keeping. He stepped out into the pale morning light. Decimus followed. The door closed behind them, and the world outside felt different. Caesar's litter moved slowly through the narrow streets of Rome. Citizens looked up as he passed, whispering among themselves. Some bowed, some nodded respectfully, but many simply watched. The city felt on edge. Vendors who usually called out prices spoke more quietly today. Children played with less enthusiasm. Even dogs seemed strangely subdued, wandering the streets with cautious steps. Caesar noticed the change. He watched the people through half-open curtains, his eyes soft, contemplative. The murmurs of the crowd washed over him like a distant tide, unintelligible, emotional, weighted. Some gestures were warm, some were cold, most were uncertain. It was the uncertainty that struck Caesar the most. Rome was afraid, not of him, not of today, but of the unknown future waiting just beyond this moment. He felt the heaviness of their expectations. Expectations he had tried all his life to live up to. A soldier, a reformer, a dictator, a savior, a villain, a man of contradictions held together by sheer will. And now, the city he rebuilt seemed to be holding its breath as he passed. As Caesar's litter approached the forum, someone stepped forward from the crowd, a man dressed in simple robes, with eyes that carried the distant, almost haunted look of someone who listened to whispers others couldn't hear. It was the soothsayer who had warned Caesar weeks earlier. "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar remembered him. When the litter stopped momentarily, Caesar leaned forward. "Are you the man who warned me?" he asked. The soothsayer nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." Caesar offered a faint smile, attempting levity to lighten the tension growing inside him. "Well," Caesar said softly, "the Ides of March have come." The soothsayer held Caesar's gaze with a look that sent a chill through the air. "Yes," he answered, "but they have not yet passed." Caesar's smile faded. A tremor passed through the crowd. Before Caesar could speak again, the litter moved forward, pulled away by the momentum of the day. The soothsayer disappeared into the sea of people, leaving behind an echo that settled into Caesar's mind like a cold stone. When Caesar approached the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting temporarily, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Senators gathered near the entrance, speaking in hushed voices, their expressions strained. Many of them avoided Caesar's eyes. Some bowed too quickly. Some smiled too tightly. Some stiffened as he passed. Inside the curia, chairs were arranged in a semicircle. Marble statues loomed over the room. Sunlight filtered in through high openings, casting long slanted beams across the floor. The air felt strange, thick, heavy, anxious. But Caesar walked forward with calm, steady footsteps. Not bold, not fearful, simply accepting. He had been warned by letters. He had been warned by dreams. He had been warned by prophecy. He had been warned by instinct. Yet he continued, not because he was unaware, but because he believed Rome still needed him, and because, deep inside, he believed that even if betrayal came, he would meet it with dignity. As Caesar stepped into the chamber, senators began to rise from their seats. Their faces flickered between forced respect and hidden intent. The door closed behind him with a quiet, echoing thud. That sound, that simple thud, was the final barrier between Caesar and the fate waiting for him. The night was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, too still, too observant. A thin winter moon hovered above the Palatine hill like a watching eye, resting on its back, dim and pale, as if exhausted by the weight of the world. Rome normally thrummed even after dusk, carts rumbling over stone, vendors calling, drunks brawling in the alleys. But on this night, it seemed as though the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for something it could not name. Caesar stood in the courtyard outside his residence, hands behind his back, staring up at that silent moon. The cold air brushed against his face, but he hardly felt it. His mind was elsewhere, caught between the ancient stones beneath his feet and the shifting loyalties that surrounded him like an invisible web. A faint lantern glowed behind him, its light falling across the marble tiles, softening the hard edges of the world. He inhaled slowly, exhaling a mist that disappeared almost instantly. The night had a way of sharpening thoughts, and Caesar knew that clarity often came at the darkest hour. On the table beside him lay 3 letters, unsealed for the first time in days. Each one carried the same handwriting, the same urgency, the same chilling truth. They are preparing to strike. He read those words again and again, letting them settle deep inside him. And yet, despite their weight, he felt no panic, only a cold calmness that came from a lifetime of surviving storms. Behind him, the soft footsteps of Calpurnia approached. Her presence was gentle, cautious, as if she were stepping into a dream that might dissolve under too much pressure. She touched his arm lightly. "You're awake again," she whispered. Caesar nodded without turning. Sleep is a luxury when Rome refuses to dream. She lowered her eyes. "I fear the letters are true." For a long moment, Caesar didn't answer. The silence between them was thick with meaning, the silence of truth neither wished to confront. Finally, Caesar spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "If Rome is to remain whole, I must walk into this storm, even knowing it may swallow me." He wasn't speaking bravely. He was speaking honestly. And that honesty, Calpurnia knew, was more frightening than any fear he could express. The moon drifted higher, casting long shadows across the courtyard, shadows that seemed to reach toward Caesar like pale, grasping hands. On the other side of the city, the Senate house was dark except for one flickering oil lamp at its center. The long marble chamber, usually filled with debate and voices echoing against its vaulted ceiling, now held only a small circle of men with lowered heads and shifting eyes. Cassius leaned forward, his fingers drumming the table impatiently. "We cannot wait any longer. His power grows every hour." His voice was sharp, cutting through the whispers. Brutus stood with his arms crossed, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. The lamplight emphasized the tired lines around his eyes. This was not the Brutus Rome knew. the calm philosopher, the restrained statesman. This was a man torn in two. Trebonius cleared his throat. The festival of the Ides, it will draw him to the Senate. That is our only opening. And the letters? Brutus asked quietly, as if afraid the walls might answer. Cassius' mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Let him read them. Truth is only as powerful as the man who believes it. But that was exactly what worried Brutus. If Caesar believed the warnings, if he believed the danger was real, then he might avoid the Senate entirely. And without his presence, their plan would collapse. The men around the table shifted uneasily, shadows flickering over their faces like ghosts predicting their fate. We must make him feel safe, Cassius said. The more confident he is, the less he will suspect. Brutus looked down at his hands. They were trembling. In the background, another senator, Decimus, remained silent, eyes narrowed, calculating. He was the bridge between the conspirators and Caesar's inner circle. Without him, the plan was nothing, and Decimus knew it. Finally, Brutus spoke again, voice heavy. If he dies, Rome must believe it was justice, not ambition. Cassius nodded slowly. But in the silence that followed, every man in the room knew the truth. What they planned was not justice. It was fear. Just before dawn, as the horizon blushed with its first pale light, a courier arrived at Caesar's residence. His horse was coated in a thin layer of frost. His cloak was stiff with cold, and in his hand was a scroll sealed with a crude wax stamp. No official emblem, no family crest. The messenger bowed deeply. For you, Caesar. It was given to me by a man who begged me to deliver it personally. He feared your life was in danger. Caesar took the letter and dismissed the courier with a nod. Inside the dim chamber, he broke the wax seal and unrolled the parchment. The handwriting was hurried, the ink uneven. But the message was unmistakably clear. Do not go to the Senate. They mean to kill you. Many are involved. Trust no one, even those you call friends. Beneath it was a list of names. Nearly half were men Caesar had shared meals with, men he had defended, men he had lifted into power with his own hands. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with a quiet ache that felt older than the city itself. Betrayal always came from those closest to you. He had learned that long ago. He stared at the paper for a long time, letting the letters blur. This was no political warning. This was not another vague whisper. This was the truth, laid bare. Caesar folded the parchment carefully, as though it were something fragile. When he closed his eyes, the image burned behind his eyelids. Brutus' name was on the list. Across the city, Brutus sat alone in his study, lighting a small oil lamp. The room smelled of parchment, old ink, and the faint metallic tang of the dagger hidden beneath his tunic. He stared at his hands, turning them slowly, as though searching for an answer in the creases of his palms. He whispered, almost to himself, "If I act, I betray a father. If I do nothing, I betray a republic." The words were barely audible, spoken only to the shadows. He reached for a scroll, Plato's Republic, a text he had read countless times. But tonight, even philosophy felt small compared to the weight in his chest. Brutus imagined Caesar's face, warm, trusting, almost paternal. A man who saw potential in him. A man who had protected him. A man who had once said, "Brutus, Rome will belong to you one day." The memory cut deeper than any blade. A soft knock came at the door. Portia, his wife, stepped in quietly. She approached him slowly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You haven't slept?" she murmured. Brutus shook his head. "How does one sleep when Rome trembles?" Portia knelt beside him. "I know your heart, Brutus. You were not made for violence." He closed his eyes, taking a slow breath. "But I may be made for sacrifice." Portia touched his hand gently. "Then pray the gods forgive what the world will not understand." Morning arrived with a somber stillness. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. A breeze swept through the city, carrying with it the distant sense of fresh bread, smoke, and something else, anticipation. Caesar dressed slowly, fastening his cloak, fastening his brooch, fastening his resolve. He glanced at the table where the letters lay. They seemed to stare back at him, demanding a decision. Calpurnia approached again, her expression pale, her voice trembling. "Do not go today, I beg you." Caesar reached out and touched her cheek softly. "My dear, if fate has chosen its hour, who am I to resist?" Calpurnia shook her head fiercely. "Fate can be influenced. Destiny can be delayed." He smiled gently. "Then let us hope destiny is willing to wait." But deep down, they both knew the truth. Destiny does not wait. A knock echoed through the hall. Decimus entered with practiced confidence, wearing a mask of concern that felt almost too convincing. "Caesar," he said warmly, "the Senate grows restless. They expect you. Your absence will be seen as an insult." Caesar studied him carefully. Decimus was loyal. He had fought beside Caesar in Gaul. He had been granted lands, wealth, status, all by Caesar's hand. Betrayal from him felt nearly unimaginable. Yet something was off. Something quiet. Something cold. Still, Caesar nodded slowly. "Very well. Prepare my litter." Calpurnia stepped forward. "No, please. Listen to the warnings." Decimus placed a hand over his heart. "The people await their leader. The Senate awaits its consul. Rome awaits its Caesar." The final word echoed, and Caesar, holding the last warning letter in his hand, finally rose to his feet. As Caesar left his residence, the early morning sun cast long shadows behind him. Servants bowed. Guards nodded. The streets were still waking up. But Caesar felt something strange in the air, an unsettling quiet, as though the city itself sensed what was coming. He tightened his cloak around his shoulders. Every step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the base of the Palatine stairs, he paused briefly. The letters weighed on him like stones. He thought about turning back, just for a moment, just long enough to calm Calpurnia's fears. But then he exhaled and stepped forward. He had lived his entire life walking toward danger. He could not turn away now. On the way to the Senate, several figures approached Caesar with warnings. A soothsayer whispered, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar smiled faintly. "The Ides are here." A man tried to hand him another scroll, another warning, but Caesar moved past before he could read it. Even the wind seemed to shift unnaturally, howling between buildings as though trying to speak. But Caesar walked on, steady and calm, as if marching toward a destiny he had already accepted. The Senate was unusually crowded when Caesar arrived. Voices hushed as he approached. Cloaks shifted. Eyes darted. At the center of the chamber stood the curious steps, marble, cold, and echoing with centuries of decisions and power. And at the top stood Brutus. Their eyes met. For a single second, the world froze. In Brutus' gaze, Caesar saw everything: the doubt, the heartbreak, the conflict, the unspoken apology. In Caesar's gaze, Brutus saw recognition, not shock, recognition, as though Caesar had always known this moment would come. When Caesar stepped inside, senators formed a loose circle around him, subtle, deliberate, suffocating. Trebonius moved to distract Mark Antony outside the chamber. Cassius shifted to block the exit. Casca stood behind Caesar, hand trembling near his dagger. Brutus remained still, breath shallow, face pale. Caesar approached the curious chair, unaware that no decree, no debate, no policy would be discussed today. Only betrayal, only blood. Before the storm, there is always silence. A deep silence that feels like the universe itself inhaling. Caesar paused near the statue of Pompey, his former ally turned rival, whose downfall Caesar had overseen. The irony was not lost. History had a cruel sense of symmetry. He placed a hand briefly on the statue's base, steadying himself. Then he turned. All around him, faces watched. Some grim, some trembling, some cold as stone. Caesar nodded. Let us begin. But it was already beginning. The blades were waiting. The letters had warned him. The omens had whispered to him. The city had mourned for him before he took a single step inside. And yet, he had walked in willingly. Because Caesar understood something the others never would. A man can choose his actions, but destiny chooses its hour. And destiny had chosen this hour. There is a strange quiet in the human heart before tragedy. A kind of stillness that feels almost holy. As if the world itself pauses, stunned by what it knows is about to unfold. Inside the Senate house, Caesar stood near the statue of Pompey. The morning light filtered through the high windows in soft, dusty beams. It painted the marble floor in strips of gold. Strips soon to be stained red. Casca, nervous, pale, unable to breathe normally, moved behind Caesar with small hesitant steps. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, louder than the murmurs of the Senate, louder than the shuffle of sandals on stone. He reached for his dagger. His fingers shook. History would remember Casca as the man who struck first. But in truth, Casca was terrified. This was no heroic act. This was fear, desperation, and political panic wrapped inside a trembling human hand. Caesar leaned forward to speak with Cimber, who had approached him with a false request for mercy on behalf of his exiled brother. Cimber's voice quivered. Caesar, please. I beg you. Reconsider. Caesar placed a hand on his shoulder. His tone was calm, almost gentle. Your brother broke Rome's laws. But I will consider. Cimber suddenly grabbed Caesar's toga. He pulled it down from the shoulder. A gesture no one in Rome dared to do to Caesar. Not even his enemies. The gesture stunned the chamber. A single breath of shocked silence filled the air. Then, Casca moved, and the world broke. Casca thrust the blade forward, but he missed the mark. His strike cut only shallowly into Caesar's neck, slicing skin, barely drawing blood. Caesar flinched, stunned, turning sharply. He grabbed Casca's wrist with surprising strength, eyes blazing. Villain, what are you doing? His voice cut through the chamber like a thunderclap. Casca panicked. He shouted, his voice breaking. Help me. Brothers, help. The signal had been given. The knives rose. dozens of them, like metal feathers flashing in the half-light of morning. A wave of motion surged forward. Cassius, Brutus, Decimus, Trebonius, Ligarius, Cimber, men who had dined with Caesar, marched with Caesar, owed their lives to Caesar. They came at him from all directions. Faces contorted not with courage, but with fear. Betrayal is rarely bold. It is frantic. Caesar staggered backward from Casca's failed strike, but the circle of senators closed in fast. He tried to push Casca away, but another blow landed, this time from Cassius, deep into his ribs. A gasp left Caesar's throat. He turned toward Cassius with disbelief. Not anger, not hatred, just disbelief. More blades ripped through the air. Metal flashed. Sandals scraped. Voices trembled. Men shouted curses under their breath, as though trying to convince themselves this act was noble. Caesar lifted his arm to defend himself, but the blows kept coming. His toga grew heavy with blood. His knees bent slightly under the shock of each impact. But it wasn't the wounds that hurt him most. It was the faces. These were men he trusted, men whose ambitions he had nurtured, men he believed were the future of Rome. Now they cut him down like enemies. Brutus had not yet moved. He stood frozen, dagger trembling in his grip, heart hammering against his ribs. He watched as Caesar defended himself, watched as the man who lifted him from obscurity now tried to fend off a crowd of his own allies. In that chaotic blur of motion, Caesar's gaze suddenly found his. Time slowed. Caesar's eyes softened. There was no accusation in them, no wrath, no surprise, only hurt, deep, raw hurt, and a kind of quiet sorrow that Brutus would remember for the rest of his life. It felt like a father looking at a son who had broken something precious. Brutus inhaled sharply, a sound like a sob. He stepped forward. His dagger gleamed, and with shaking hands, he thrust it into Caesar's side. Caesar gasped. His voice fell to a whisper, barely audible. Et tu, brute. And in that moment, Brutus felt something inside him shatter. He had not just betrayed a leader. He had betrayed a father, a friend, a man who loved him deeply. After Brutus struck, Caesar stopped resisting. His arms dropped. His shoulders slumped. He looked around the chamber, at the men now hacking, slashing, stabbing. 40 blades, 23 wounds, a flurry of desperate motions. But Caesar seemed far away now. His eyes drifted to the floor, then to the statue of Pompey, his old rival. There was an irony to it, dying at the foot of the man whose shadow had once defined Roman politics. His legs buckled. He pulled his toga around him, trying to preserve dignity in death, a gesture only a Roman would understand. He collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, the marble cold against his cheek, his blood pooling into the cracks between ancient stones. And then, stillness, the stillness of the moment after thunder, the stillness of a world holding its breath. Julius Caesar, general, conqueror, leader of Rome, lay silent and unmoving on the Senate floor. A breath ago, the room was alive with violence. Now, it was silent enough to hear a pin drop. One by one, the conspirators stepped back, as though waking from a fever dream. Their daggers dripped red. Their faces were pale. The enormity of what they had done hung heavy in the air. Brutus tried to steady his breathing, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. He looked at Caesar's body, at the man who had embraced him like a son, and something inside him felt wrong, utterly wrong. He wiped the blade on his cloak, though the stain never truly left him. Cassius approached with a trembling smile. "It's done," he whispered. "We have saved the Republic." Brutus didn't respond. He couldn't. He felt sick, not from guilt alone, but from the sudden clarity that the Republic they claimed to save was now drenched in the blood of the only man capable of holding it together. The Senate chamber felt cold, too cold. Brutus took one last look at Caesar, then turned away. His footsteps echoed, like hollow drums in an empty hall. Outside the Curia, Mark Antony had been delayed by Trebonius. He hadn't expected treachery, not like this. When he finally pulled away and stepped inside, the smell hit him first. Iron, sweat, and fear. Then he saw the body. Antony froze, eyes widening, mouth tightening. Antony had fought beside Caesar. He had ridden through storms and battles with him. He knew Caesar's voice, his laugh, his flaws, his ambitions. He had never known him to fall. Not like this. Antony swallowed hard, his throat burning. But he did not scream. He did not lash out. He did not attack the conspirators. Not yet. Antony understood something they did not. The battle was lost. But the war had just begun. When word of Caesar's death spread through the city, Rome convulsed. People screamed in the streets. Merchants bolted their stalls shut. Mothers pulled children indoors. The marketplaces emptied as if the city had been struck by plague. The common people loved Caesar, not because he was perfect, but because he understood them. He fed them, protected them, fought for them. And now he was gone, killed not by enemies, but by men who claimed to save the Republic. For the first time in years, Rome felt leaderless, and in the vacuum of power, fear poured in like a flood. That night, Mark Antony sat alone in a dimly lit room, staring at Caesar's blood-stained toga. His hands trembled, but not with fear, with fury. He whispered into the darkness, voice low and steady. "They think they killed him. They think Rome will thank them." He leaned forward, jaw tightening. "They have no idea what they've unleashed." He stood, pacing slowly, each step measured, deliberate. "Tomorrow," he said, "Rome will hear the truth." Antony wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't a strategist like Caesar. But he understood the people, and he understood grief, and he understood how to ignite a fire. Caesar's assassination was meant to save the Republic. Antony would make it the spark that burned Rome's old world to the ground. The day of Caesar's funeral arrived heavy with sorrow. The forum overflowed with tens of thousands of Roman citizens. Some carried torches. Some carried flowers. Some simply carried grief. Caesar's body lay in a wooden coffin draped in white. Mark Antony stepped onto the platform, his face composed, his eyes burning. Then he began to speak, softly at first, his voice a steady river that flowed through the crowd. He spoke of Caesar's victories, of his mercy, of his generosity. He spoke of the conspirators, of their envy, their cowardice, their fear. And then, in one slow, devastating motion, he held up Caesar's torn, blood-stained toga. The crowd gasped. Some cried out. Some fell to their knees. Antony pointed to each wound, describing how the blade had entered, naming the man who had struck. "And this wound," he said softly, touching Brutus' tear in the fabric. "This was the unkindest cut of all." A roar rose from the crowd. Grief turned to anger. Anger turned to rage. The people surged forward, crying for justice, crying for vengeance. Antony stepped back, his voice echoing over the chaos. Caesar is dead, but Rome lives through you. The city erupted. Fires were lit, stones thrown. Effigies of the conspirators burned in the streets. Rome had chosen its side. The moment Mark Antony finished speaking, the city of Rome erupted into chaos. The Forum, once the stage for debates and laws, became a theater of grief and fury. Tens of thousands surged forward, their voices a rising tide of outrage. Merchants abandoned their stalls, children clung to mothers, and the wind carried cries like distant thunder. Torches lit the morning mist, casting long, dancing shadows across the marble columns. The smell of smoke, blood, and sweat filled the streets. It was a Rome transformed, as if the city itself had been reborn through fire and anger. Caesar's death had been meant to save the Republic, but the people saw only betrayal. The conspirators had intended to strike fear into the hearts of Rome's citizens, but fear quickly turned to fury, and in that fury, they became targets. The mob did not distinguish between conspirator and ally. Shouts of "Death to Brutus! Death to the killers!" echoed off the stone walls. Even those who had plotted carefully found themselves running through a city now wild with grief and rage. Brutus and Cassius quickly realized that Antony's words had ignited more than anger. They had ignited revolution. The streets of Rome were no longer safe. They slipped through back alleys and quiet passages, hearts pounding, aware that each shadow might hide a citizen ready to avenge Caesar. Cassius cursed under his breath, a low, bitter sound, as they scaled a narrow stairway toward their hidden exit. Brutus' face was pale and drawn. He could still see Caesar's eyes, the soft sorrow that had looked at him just before the blade. It haunted him like a ghost, refusing to leave. Outside the city, the morning mist had lifted. Birds sang hesitantly. The world seemed to carry on, indifferent to the human tragedy that had erupted in the heart of Rome. Mark Antony stood among the flames of the Forum, eyes scanning the crowd. He understood that the assassination had not just killed a man, it had destabilized the city. And from instability, power could rise. He did not immediately hunt the conspirators. Instead, Antony carefully stoked the fury of the people, giving them a voice, giving them an outlet. Every speech, every gesture was calculated to turn grief into action, sorrow into loyalty, and confusion into devotion. He knew that Rome needed a figurehead, a symbol, and that symbol was Julius Caesar. Dead, yet alive in the memory of the people, immortalized by Antony's words. By evening, the conspirators were in hiding, the Senate in disarray, and Rome under a controlled chaos orchestrated by Antony. Meanwhile, far from the blood-soaked streets, a young man named Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, received the shocking news. At only 18, he was thrust into a world of political chaos, betrayal, and looming civil war. Octavian had been groomed for leadership in Caesar's shadow, but the reality of power now loomed terrifyingly close. He was young, inexperienced, and yet destiny seemed to push him forward. He wrote to Antony immediately, pledging loyalty and vowing to uphold Caesar's legacy. This alliance, born of necessity and shared ambition, would set the stage for a war that would reshape Rome forever. Brutus and Cassius fled to the eastern provinces of the Roman Republic, gathering allies and soldiers as they went. They tried to justify their actions as noble, patriotic, necessary. But the shadow of Caesar's gaze followed them relentlessly. Every campfire in the night seemed to whisper his words. Every breeze carried the echo of Mark Antony's funeral speech. The ghosts of Rome seemed to trail them, reminding them of the people they had betrayed and the city they had destabilized. Rome became a tinderbox. Antony's speeches ignited uprisings, and Octavian consolidated support among loyalists. The streets and provinces were divided between loyalty to Caesar's memory and fear of Brutus and the conspirators. Battles erupted. Skirmishes turned into full-scale engagements. Legions loyal to the assassins clashed with troops inspired by Antony and Octavian. Rome itself was caught in a transformation from republic to chaos, its foundations trembling beneath the weight of human ambition, grief, and revenge. Yet, amid all the bloodshed, the letters Caesar had received remained. Those final warnings he had read but ultimately chosen to disregard, became artifacts of history. Historians would later debate whether they could have saved him. Some would claim Caesar's death was inevitable. Others would argue that he had chosen to confront fate consciously, aware of the betrayal but unwilling to cower. The letters, filled with urgency and love and fear, would survive him, testifying to a world where even the greatest of men can be betrayed by those closest, and where destiny, once set in motion, cannot be undone. Civil war would rage for years. Brutus and Cassius would ultimately meet defeat in the east. Antony would consolidate power, and Octavian, young, calculating, relentless, would rise to claim Caesar's mantle. The Roman Republic, once a system of checks and balances, would slowly crumble under the weight of ambition, revenge, and civil conflict. History would remember the Ides of March not just as the day Caesar died, but as the beginning of a transformation that would define the Roman Empire for centuries. Rome had changed forever, and in that change, the echoes of betrayal, loyalty, love, and ambition would resonate eternally. In the quiet aftermath, after the last battle was fought, the dust settled and the city began to rebuild. The streets of Rome grew still once more. Temples and statues were repaired. Markets reopened. The people continued their lives, carrying in their hearts the memory of a man who had been both beloved and betrayed. The letters, once warnings, became relics. They told a story not just of Caesar, but of human ambition, loyalty, fear, and destiny. They whispered to generations who would study them. Even the greatest among us are mortal. Even the most powerful can fall. And betrayal, once done, echoes through eternity. Caesar's story did not end with his death. It continued in the civil wars, the rise of Octavian, the fall of Brutus and Cassius, and the birth of the Roman Empire. The Ides of March remained forever etched in memory, a symbol of both human frailty and the inexorable march of destiny. And as the Roman sun set over the Tiber, one could almost hear the quiet sigh of the city, mourning, remembering, and yet moving forward, as history always does. Octavian, barely 18, arrived in Rome in the wake of chaos. The streets were still scarred from the riots after Caesar's funeral. Buildings bore the faint marks of torches. Markets smelled of smoke and fear. The people's faces carried grief, so raw it seemed etched into the city itself. He walked slowly through the forum, absorbing every detail. Every glance at Caesar's statues, every whisper of loyalty from citizens, reminded him of the weight he had inherited. He was no longer merely Caesar's adopted son. He was now the symbol of his memory, the last hope of a divided Rome. Letters from Caesar, passed down through loyal officers, had prepared him for this moment. They taught him not just strategy, but patience, not just leadership, but cunning. Octavian understood that power in Rome was as much about perception as it was about armies. Meanwhile, Antony consolidated his forces. He controlled the streets, the Senate, and, importantly, the loyalty of the people. The conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, were gathering in the east, building armies to challenge the emerging alliance of Antony and Octavian. Rome became a chessboard of politics and power. Legions shifted allegiance. Cities sent ambassadors to the young Octavian. Spies whispered secrets through alleys and temples. The Republic teetered on the edge, its foundations groaning under ambition and betrayal. Octavian's advisors warned him, "You are young. Antony is experienced. The people fear him more than they respect you." Octavian, unflinching, replied, "I may be young, but Caesar's spirit guides me. Rome will know its true heirs." Brutus and Cassius did not waste time. They rallied troops in Macedonia and other eastern provinces. They sent letters to allies, urging them to join the defense of the Republic. They framed themselves as saviors, the last hope of freedom against tyranny. But Antony and Octavian moved faster than anticipated. Octavian had inherited not just wealth, but Caesar's loyal officers, veterans who understood strategy and fearlessness. The two sides marched toward inevitable confrontation, their armies crossing the lands Caesar had once conquered. And while thousands prepared for battle, the Roman populace watched from the edges, terrified and exhilarated, knowing that the bloodshed to come would shape the world forever. In 42 BCE, the forces finally collided near Philippi. The air was thick with anticipation, smoke from campfires mixing with the metallic scent of weapons. Troops arranged in disciplined lines, standards waving, banners fluttering in the wind. Brutus stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield, surveying the armies. Cassius moved among the ranks, offering last-minute encouragement, though worry crept into his voice. They had trained well, fought hard, but Antony and Octavian had strategy, cunning, and the loyalty of the masses on their side. The first clash was brutal. Steel rang against steel, shields shattered, and the cries of men echoed across the plain like thunder. Blood soaked the earth, carving the soil with the cost of ambition, loyalty, and revenge. The battle raged for days. Both sides took heavy losses, but Antony and Octavian gradually gained the upper hand. Brutus and Cassius, once confident, began to see the tide turning. Even their ideals could not withstand the weight of disciplined, strategic power. Cassius, despairing after a critical defeat, took his own life. Brutus, though grieving and exhausted, continued to fight, trying to salvage what remained of the cause he believed in. But Antony and Octavian were relentless. On the second day, Brutus recognized that all hope was lost. He wrote letters to his allies, saying farewell, and then, in a quiet, solemn moment, ended his life. The Republic's last defenders were gone. The dream of freedom, as Brutus and Cassius had envisioned it, was extinguished. And yet, from the ashes, something new would rise. With the conspirators defeated, Octavian returned to Rome, a young man now tempered by war and loss. He was no longer merely Caesar's heir. He was a leader in his own right. The Senate, exhausted and fearful, granted him unprecedented powers. Antony remained influential, but Octavian's cleverness, patience, and inherited legitimacy gave him a unique edge. He began consolidating control, restoring order to the city, stabilizing the provinces, and nurturing loyalty among citizens and legions alike. Octavian understood the lessons of Caesar's letters. Trust, caution, and patience were key. He would not repeat the mistakes that had cost Caesar his life. Rome needed stability, and Octavian would provide it through calculated action, not passion. Years passed. Octavian, now Augustus, became Rome's first emperor, officially ending the Republic. The Ides of March, Caesar's assassination, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of ambition, betrayal, and the fragility of power. Rome transformed under Augustus' rule. Cities rebuilt, laws codified, armies disciplined, and the memory of Caesar preserved in statues, temples, and the stories of loyal citizens. The letters that once warned of betrayal were studied by scholars, copied, and preserved as relics of human foresight. And in these letters, generations would find lessons. That loyalty can be broken, that destiny may not wait, and that the actions of a few can alter the fate of millions. Caesar's death was more than a murder. It was a pivot of history. The Republic collapsed not immediately, but over decades of conflict and civil war. Yet, from betrayal arose stability, power, and the empire that would endure for centuries. History remembers the Ides of March not just for the act itself, but for what followed. The rise of Octavian, the clever navigation of Antony, the downfall of Brutus and Cassius, and the birth of an empire that would dominate the known world. The letters Caesar had read, and ultimately chosen to ignore, had left a profound lesson. Even the wisest man cannot escape the consequences of trust and betrayal. The letters survived. In the centuries to follow, scholars debated their contents. Some argued they could have saved Caesar. Others insisted he chose to meet fate willingly. They became a symbol, a warning, a whisper through history. Power carries risk. Trust carries danger. Destiny does not forgive. The Ides of March, the assassination, the rise of Octavian, all are intertwined. All are reminders that history is shaped not only by the great, but by the choices, betrayals, and courage of men and women who walk in their shadows. The streets of Rome eventually quieted. The people moved on. The empire solidified. The Republic's memory faded like mist at dawn. But the letters, the warnings, the betrayals, they remained. A whisper in the mind of every historian. A story told softly to those who wish to learn. A story of ambition, loyalty, love, betrayal, and the inexorable march of destiny. And as Rome slept under the stars, its citizens unaware of the full magnitude of events, the ghost of Caesar lingered in memory, not just as a man, but as the pivot upon which an empire turned. While Octavian strengthened his control over Rome, Mark Antony turned his gaze eastward. He was no longer just a general. He was a man carrying the memory of Caesar and the burden of ambition. His alliance with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, was as much political as personal, a union that promised both wealth and influence. Antony's forces gathered along the eastern Mediterranean, ships bristling with warriors, armies trained and ready, yet hearts filled with the uncertainty of loyalty. He was aware that Octavian watched him closely, measuring every step, calculating every flaw. The people of Rome whispered tales of Antony's extravagance, his devotion to Cleopatra, and his willingness to defy tradition. Some admired him, others feared him, but all knew one truth. Antony was a force that could shape the future or destroy it. Antony's love for Cleopatra was legendary. Their meetings were lavish, filled with splendor, adorned with the gold of Egypt and the perfume of exotic flowers. But this was not merely romance, it was strategy. Every gesture, every gift, every ship in the Nile fleet was a message, a declaration of power and influence stretching across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra, astute and commanding, understood the stakes. She knew Antony's devotion could be leveraged to Egypt's advantage, ensuring that her kingdom remained sovereign even as Rome expanded its reach. And yet, history would remember their love not just as political maneuvering, but as a story of passion intertwined with the fate of nations. In Rome, Octavian observed Antony's movements carefully. Letters from spies, whispers of the eastern provinces, and rumors from ambassadors all painted a picture of Antony's growing power and his dangerous attachment to Cleopatra. Octavian, ever patient, understood that direct confrontation now would be reckless. He needed Rome solid, the Senate loyal, and the people on his side. He cultivated support quietly, speaking with governors, commanders, and senators, building the network that would eventually allow him to challenge Antony decisively. Octavian's patience mirrored the lessons of Caesar's letters. Trust selectively, strike decisively, and let ambition serve your vision, not destroy it. By 31 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra's forces had gathered along the western coast of Greece, preparing for what would become the Battle of Actium. Octavian's legions, disciplined and strategically positioned, moved silently yet with terrifying precision. The Mediterranean waters, usually serene and sparkling under the sun, now reflected the tension of men poised on the edge of destiny. Ships lined in formation, warriors armed and ready, commanders reviewing maps, orders whispered along the decks. The world seemed to hold its breath. The clash was not merely about land or wealth. It was about the future of Rome, the legacy of Caesar, and the balance of power in the ancient world. The day of the battle dawned, the sun casting long shadows across the Aegean. Octavian's fleet approached with precision, maintaining formation, the soldiers silent yet tense, knowing the weight of history rested upon their oars and sails. Antony's ships, larger and adorned with Egyptian splendor, gleamed in the morning light. Cleopatra's presence on the flagship inspired loyalty, yet some of Antony's men whispered doubts about the queen's influence and the general's judgment. The two forces collided with thunderous impact, ramming ships, clashing metal, screams of men falling into the sea, the smell of salt water mixing with fear and blood. Octavian's strategy of patience and discipline slowly overpowered Antony's grandeur. By midday, Antony realized the battle was turning. Chaos spread across the fleet. Ships fled, some sinking, some captured. Cleopatra's ships turned back toward Egypt, her retreat causing panic among Antony's forces. Antony, refusing to abandon Cleopatra, pursued her to Egypt. But the triumph of Octavian was unstoppable. Antony's forces were decimated, morale shattered, and hope slipping away like sand through his fingers. In Alexandria, Antony and Cleopatra faced the reality of defeat. The walls of the city could not protect them from the inevitability of Octavian's power. Reports of their former allies abandoning them, combined with Octavian's relentless advance, left them with one tragic choice. Antony, consumed by despair and regret, ended his life. Cleopatra, facing the prospect of humiliation and captivity, followed, choosing death in a manner both mysterious and deliberate, ensuring that her legend would endure alongside Antony's. With Antony and Cleopatra gone, Octavian returned to Rome triumphant. The Senate hailed him as the restorer of peace. Rome's provinces pledged loyalty, fearing both his authority and admiring his cunning. He had learned from Caesar's letters, from Antony's mistakes, and from the betrayal that had once cost Rome its greatest leader. Octavian would consolidate power carefully, establishing the Principate, effectively creating an empire that preserved Roman traditions while centralizing authority. Rome would never again know the chaos of the Republic's final years. The Ides of March had set in motion a chain of events that culminated in a single ruler, guiding Rome with wisdom tempered by ambition and strategy. Caesar's assassination, Brutus and Cassius' failed rebellion, Antony's demise, and Octavian's rise. These events marked the end of the Roman Republic. They also marked the beginning of the Roman Empire, a new era in which Rome would dominate the Mediterranean world for centuries. History would remember Caesar as a brilliant general, a reformer, and a man betrayed by those he trusted. It would remember Brutus and Cassius as idealists, tragic figures consumed by ambition and principle. It would remember Antony and Cleopatra as lovers and strategists undone by their passions. And it would remember Octavian, Augustus, as the master of legacy, patience, and power. The letters Caesar had received, the warnings he chose to ignore, remained a testament to the fragile interplay of trust, loyalty, and destiny. They were studied by scholars, copied by generations, and preserved as lessons for those who would come after. Through them, history whispered to all who would listen. Great men rise and fall. Betrayal is never far from ambition. The choices we make echo across time, shaping empires and civilizations. Caesar's letters were not merely warnings. They were the bridge between mortality and legacy, between human ambition and historical inevitability. As Rome settled into peace under Augustus, the city slept beneath the stars, its streets once again quiet, yet alive with memory. The shadows of Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, Antony, and Cleopatra lingered. The letters, the betrayals, the battles, all had transformed the world. History, as it always does, continued to turn, and in its quiet moments, the whispers of those letters could still be heard, telling the story of ambition, loyalty, betrayal, love, and destiny. And as the Roman Empire grew, those lessons endured, carried across centuries, etched into the very fabric of civilization. Rome had changed forever, and so had the world. After decades of turmoil, Rome began to breathe again. The Republic had fallen, but the city endured. Augustus, once Octavian, now emperor, moved carefully to consolidate power, never forgetting the lessons of betrayal, ambition, and loyalty that Caesar's death had taught him. The citizens, who had once erupted into violence, now walked the streets with a mixture of awe and caution. They admired Augustus, revered him, and feared him, just as Rome's history had dictated. The letters of Caesar, preserved and copied, served as subtle reminders that leadership carried both glory and danger. The Senate, which had once dared to murder a man they feared, now operated within a new reality. Their voices mattered, but the final word rested with Augustus. The lessons of the Ides of March had transformed governance forever. Augustus began reforms that would stabilize Rome and its vast territories. He reorganized the military, ensuring loyalty through careful rewards and discipline. He restructured the Senate, balancing appearances of power with the reality of his authority. He rebuilt temples and public buildings, crafting an image of continuity and piety. These reforms were not merely administrative, they were psychological. Augustus understood that an empire is held together not only by laws, but by faith in its leaders, by shared identity, and by stories that shape collective memory. Caesar's letters and the story of his betrayal became tools, reminders of what happens when ambition eclipses loyalty and what must be done to preserve order. Throughout the empire, statues of Caesar were erected. His image appeared on coins. His deeds were recorded by historians. The assassination, once a shocking act of betrayal, became a cautionary tale, whispered in the halls of power, taught in schools, and immortalized in literature. Rome remembered him not just as a general or dictator, but as a man who had transformed the very idea of leadership. His life, his death, and even his letters became a template. How power could rise, how loyalty could fracture, and how destiny could be shaped by human choices. The letters Caesar had received, the warnings ignored, and the messages he had written to allies and generals survived the chaos of civil war. They were copied and preserved by scribes, studied by historians, and admired by future leaders. Through them, generations learned the subtleties of human ambition, the dangers of betrayal, and the fragility of even the greatest power. Each letter told not only of events, but of emotion. The anxiety of trust, the fear of betrayal, the hope for loyalty, and the confidence that history would judge wisely. The empire that Augustus shaped was both Roman and eternal. It was built on the foundations of loyalty, fear, and strategic brilliance. The ghosts of Brutus and Cassius lingered in memory, reminding future leaders that ideals, however noble, can falter when faced with human ambition. Rome's citizens, for their part, moved forward. Markets flourished, arts thrived, and the memory of Caesar's leadership became intertwined with the city's identity. The lessons of the past, betrayal, ambition, loyalty, echoed in every corner of the empire. Caesar's assassination had changed the course of civilization. It reminded rulers that trust must be guarded, alliances must be strategic, and the ambitions of men could alter the fate of nations. The letters he received and wrote were more than personal communications. They became historical artifacts. They preserved the essence of human emotion, fear, hope, love, loyalty, and despair. They taught that history is never just events. It is the human story within events. And as Rome continued to grow, conquer, and endure, the lessons of Caesar, Brutus, Antony, Cleopatra, and Augustus were remembered, whispered, and studied. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period of relative peace, the Pax Romana. Borders stabilized, trade flourished, and the culture of Rome expanded across the Mediterranean. The Ides of March became a symbol, a day when betrayal reshaped history, when a single act altered the destiny of an entire civilization. And yet, out of that act, order emerged, an empire was forged, and Caesar's vision, though interrupted by death, continued to influence the world. Rome endured because it learned, adapted, and remembered. Caesar's life, death, and letters became part of the very fabric of that endurance, guiding future emperors and citizens alike. Even centuries later, scholars read Caesar's letters with reverence. They marvel at the clarity of thought, the understanding of human nature, and the foresight contained in every word. The story of betrayal, war, and empire continues to resonate. History listens, quietly, to the warnings and wisdom contained in these fragile pieces of paper. Leaders, students, and historians learn from them. That ambition can inspire greatness. That betrayal can destroy. And that even in death, a man's legacy can shape the world. Rome's streets finally quieted. The people slept beneath the stars, unaware of the countless lessons embedded in their city's past. But the letters survived. The stories survived. The echoes of betrayal, ambition, loyalty, and destiny endured. History, patient and eternal, continued its course, always whispering to those who would listen, reminding the world of Julius Caesar, of his letters, his assassination, and the empire that rose from his legacy. And as the Roman Empire expanded, it carried the lessons of the Ides of March across continents and centuries, a timeless testament to power, trust, and destiny. Caesar's life and letters became immortal. Brutus and Cassius became cautionary figures. Antony and Cleopatra became legendary lovers, entwined with politics and tragedy. Augustus became the master of legacy, power, and patience. The letters, preserved carefully, serve as whispers through history, reminding every generation, even the greatest can fall, even the wisest can be betrayed, and human ambition, when paired with destiny, shapes the world forever. Rome had survived betrayal, civil war, and ambition. History had learned its lessons. And the story of Julius Caesar, through letters, loyalty, betrayal, and empire, endures. Centuries after the Ides of March, Caesar's letters still whispered to the world. They were copied meticulously by scribes, stored in libraries, and studied by generals, emperors, and scholars. Each word carried weight, revealing the mind of a man who had faced betrayal and ambition and had understood the fragility of human loyalty. The letters spoke of caution, strategy, and foresight. They warned of conspiracies, of trusted friends whose intentions could shift like shadows. They taught that a leader must be aware of both enemies and allies, and that the consequences of misplaced trust could alter the course of history forever. Augustus, and later emperors, read and internalized these letters. They learned from Caesar's mistakes, the dangers of overconfidence, the importance of alliances, and the necessity of controlling public perception. Every emperor who followed, from Tiberius to Marcus Aurelius, understood the subtle message. Power is never absolute, and loyalty must be managed carefully. The letters also reminded rulers that legacy was more than conquest or wealth. It was the perception of integrity, wisdom, and foresight. Caesar had died, but his insight endured, influencing the minds of those who held Rome in their hands. The Ides of March became more than a date. It became a symbol. Artists, playwrights, and poets immortalized the betrayal of Caesar. Shakespeare's pen centuries later would capture the anguish and idealism of Brutus, the cunning of Antony, and the tragic grandeur of Caesar himself. Romans remembered not only the political upheaval, but the emotional reality. That betrayal could come from those closest. That ambition could blind even the wisest. And that history itself judges deeds with relentless impartiality. The letters, preserved and studied, became an emotional bridge, linking the personal anguish of Caesar to the lessons for every citizen, soldier, and leader who would come after. Caesar's letters did not only shape Rome, they shaped the world. European rulers, centuries later, studied them as blueprints of leadership and caution. Generals in distant lands, navigating the delicate balance of loyalty and power, found in these fragile parchments insight that transcended time and geography. From Napoleon to modern military strategists, the wisdom within those letters resonated. Prepare for betrayal, respect human ambition, and never underestimate the subtle shifts in loyalty. History, in its infinite patience, preserved these lessons for those willing to read between the lines. Reading Caesar's letters is more than an academic exercise. It is an emotional journey. You can feel the anxiety, the anticipation, the subtle despair that comes from knowing that even those closest to you may turn against you. Every warning carries love, loyalty, fear, and a desire to protect Rome from chaos. The letters capture the human essence of leadership, not only power and strategy, but vulnerability, emotion, and foresight. They remind us that even the greatest leaders are human, and that history is not just about events. It is about people, their hearts, and their choices. In the centuries following the empire's consolidation, Caesar's letters became required reading for the elite. Young Romans were taught not only military strategy, but the moral and ethical weight of leadership. They studied the letters' warnings about betrayal, the subtleties of loyalty, and the responsibilities that come with power. Every scholar, every aspiring senator, and every military commander learned that ambition without wisdom could destroy a civilization. Through these letters, Caesar continued to guide Rome, even from beyond the grave. The Ides of March remained etched in history. But it was not just the day of death. It was the day that taught humanity about foresight, consequence, and the weight of trust. Caesar's letters, preserved through centuries, became whispers of guidance. Advice, warning, and reflection all intertwined. They taught that history is shaped not only by battles, but by decisions. Not only by armies, but by the loyalty and betrayal of human hearts. Rome itself became a living memory of Caesar's influence. Temples, forums, and monuments preserved not just architecture, but the legacy of human choices. Every emperor, citizen, and scholar who walked the streets understood that their lives were intertwined with the lessons of the past. The letters, once fragile parchment, became eternal, symbols of guidance, caution, and the enduring presence of one man's insight. Leaders across the world, in every era, could learn from Caesar's letters. The necessity of vigilance, the importance of foresight, and the subtle balance between trust and skepticism. Even the smallest word, the faintest warning, could alter the fate of nations. The letters remind us that history is not only made by conquest, but by human emotion, by fear and love, ambition and loyalty, trust and betrayal. In understanding Caesar, we understand not only Rome, but the human condition itself. As the Roman Empire matured and expanded, the letters of Caesar remained a quiet, eternal presence in libraries, minds, and hearts. They are a testament to a man who faced betrayal, sought to guide his city, and whose insights transcended death. History, patient and enduring, whispers these lessons to anyone willing to listen. Trust wisely, act decisively, and remember that every choice echoes across time. The Ides of March was not merely the death of Julius Caesar. It was the beginning of a legacy, a story of power, loyalty, betrayal, and wisdom that would resonate for millennia. Rome slept beneath the stars, but the lessons of Caesar, preserved in letters and memory, would never rest. Julius Caesar's assassination was more than a political act. It was a lesson in human morality. Brutus and Cassius, driven by ideals and ambition, believed they were saving the Republic. Yet, history shows that betrayal is never simple. It is layered with motives, fears, hopes, and the fragile psychology of those involved. Through Caesar's letters, we glimpse his awareness of danger, his cautious trust, and his understanding of human nature. He knew that those closest to him could turn, yet he remained committed to guiding Rome. This duality, the tension between trust and caution, remains a lesson for leaders and citizens alike. History is often told through events, battles, and dates. But Caesar's letters reveal the humanity behind the headlines. His anxieties about loyalty, his love for Rome, his fear of being misunderstood, and his attempts to preserve order in a world dominated by ambition. Reading the letters, one realizes that power is not merely about strength. It is about empathy, insight, and the delicate balance between human relationships. Even the mightiest man can be vulnerable to betrayal, and even the noblest ideals can be twisted by fear or ambition. Caesar's letters did not vanish with the fall of Rome. They survived through scribes, libraries, and scholars, traveling across centuries to influence rulers, thinkers, and generals. From medieval kings to Renaissance leaders, from military strategists to philosophers, the insights endured. Anticipate betrayal, nurture loyalty, balance trust with caution, and understand the hearts of those around you. History became not just a record of events, but a mirror reflecting human behavior and ambition. And Caesar's words became a guide through that mirror. The Ides of March became an eternal symbol, representing both the dangers of political ambition and the fragility of trust. Artists painted the scene of Caesar's fall, poets immortalized Brutus' anguish, and playwrights dramatized Antony's grief. Across cultures and eras, betrayal has been studied, analyzed, and retold. Caesar's death became the archetype of trust broken, and his letters, the silent witness to human folly, reminded generations that even the wisest can fall. The moral resonance of betrayal, leadership, and loyalty transcended Rome, becoming part of humanity's collective consciousness. Leaders, scholars, and ordinary citizens alike found lessons in Caesar's experience. True leadership demands awareness of both external threats and internal dangers. It requires balancing ambition with prudence, courage with caution, and decisiveness with empathy. Caesar's letters illuminate not only the challenges of ancient Rome, but the timeless challenges of human governance. Understanding motives, predicting behavior, and navigating the intricate web of loyalty and deception. History reminds us that destiny is shaped by human choices. Brutus and Cassius believed they were steering fate, but their actions set in motion events far beyond their understanding. Caesar's death changed the Republic, elevated Octavian, and reshaped the Mediterranean world. Through his letters, we see that foresight can guide action, but cannot prevent all outcomes. Even the wisest plans must contend with the unpredictability of human nature. And yet, destiny can still be influenced by preparation, observation, and insight, a lesson that endures for all time. The fragile parchments that carried Caesar's words survived fire, war, and time. They remind us that history is not just events and battles, but choices, motives, and human emotion. Caesar's letters are a bridge across centuries, connecting modern readers to the fears, hopes, and wisdom of a man who shaped the world. They teach that every decision matters, every trust carries risk, and every betrayal echoes through time. Rome, now an empire, slept under the stars. The streets were quiet, markets hushed, and citizens unaware of the vast lessons preserved in memory and text. But the letters endured as whispers of insight, caution, and wisdom. They remained alive in the minds of those who studied them, reminding leaders of the subtle balance between ambition and loyalty, power and morality. Through these letters, history became personal. They connect Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, Antony, Cleopatra, and Augustus to generations far beyond their time. They remind us that human nature remains constant. Ambition, love, fear, loyalty, and betrayal. The letters guide not only rulers, but anyone who seeks to understand the consequences of action. History is never static. It lives through memory, documentation, and reflection. And Caesar's words whisper still, across the centuries, urging caution, insight, and humanity. The story of Caesar, his letters, and the Ides of March closes not with an ending, but with reflection. History, patient and eternal, continues its course. The lessons of trust, betrayal, ambition, and destiny remain alive, whispered through time to those willing to listen. Rome sleeps beneath the stars, its empire enduring, its culture thriving, its memory immortal. And the letters, fragile, yet eternal, carry the wisdom of one man across millennia, reminding us that even in death, the voice of history can teach, warn, and guide. The eternal sleep of history is filled with whispers, and Julius Caesar's letters remain among the loudest. Julius Caesar's letters survive not only as historical documents, but as philosophical guides. They speak of ambition tempered by caution, loyalty weighed against pragmatism, and the delicate balance between human trust and suspicion. Scholars centuries later reflected on these words, drawing lessons that reached far beyond the streets of Rome. In these letters, one finds guidance on leadership, the recognition that humans are flawed, that betrayal is inevitable, and that wise rulers must anticipate the shifting tides of loyalty, fear, and desire. Betrayal, as revealed in Caesar's letters, is both simple and complex. It is simple in its act, an ally turns against you, but complex in its motivations, fear, ambition, envy, or misguided idealism. The assassination of Caesar reminds us that even extraordinary brilliance cannot prevent treachery. Yet, his words preserve the reasoning, the warnings, and the emotional depth behind these events, turning personal tragedy into enduring wisdom for those who seek to understand power and morality. Leadership, Caesar's letters suggest, is a philosophical endeavor. It is not only strategy or command, it is psychology, foresight, and ethics intertwined. A leader must navigate human emotion as skillfully as battlefields, anticipating fear, desire, and loyalty in every action. Caesar understood that power is a tool and a responsibility. Through his letters, he imparts that true leadership requires reflection, courage, and an awareness of the consequences of every choice. The lessons within Caesar's letters echoed through centuries of leadership. European monarchs, Renaissance princes, and Enlightenment philosophers studied his life and writings. From Machiavelli's reflections on power to Napoleon's strategic planning, the Ides of March served as a cautionary tale. The letters themselves became a mirror, allowing future rulers to consider, how will my allies act? When might ambition turn to treachery? And how can my decisions shape not only the present but the centuries to come? Perhaps the most enduring lesson of Caesar's letters is trust. Trust is fragile, and betrayal is often close at hand. But trust is also necessary for leadership, for friendship, and for society to function. Reading these letters, one senses the delicate dance Caesar navigated. Trusting too little could isolate him. Trusting too much could destroy him. The lessons extend beyond politics. They are human lessons, relevant to every era and every culture, reminding us that ambition and loyalty are eternal struggles. The fall of Caesar and the rise of Augustus shaped the Mediterranean. But the philosophical impact traveled further still. Future empires, from Byzantium to the Ottoman Empire, from European kingdoms to modern states, studied the interplay of loyalty, ambition, and leadership reflected in these letters. Caesar's wisdom informed not only military strategy but governance, diplomacy, and the moral considerations of power. His writings became a timeless dialogue between the past and the present, between history and human nature. Caesar's letters are not dry instructions. They are filled with emotion, anxiety, hope, fear, and determination are woven into every line. They reveal a man aware of mortality, of the fragility of alliances, and of the weight of history on his shoulders. This emotional honesty allows generations to connect, transforming history from abstract events to a deeply human story. It reminds us that leaders, no matter how great, are never immune to fear, ambition, or the betrayal of those they trust. The Ides of March, Caesar's death, and the preservation of his letters allow reflection across millennia. We see the cycles of human ambition, the consequences of trust misplaced, and the enduring struggle between loyalty and betrayal. The letters encourage thoughtful reflection. How do we navigate human relationships? How do we lead with wisdom and foresight? How do we ensure that the decisions we make honor not only our ambition, but the greater good? History is not simply the record of events. It is the story of humans navigating complex emotions, ambitions, and choices. Caesar's letters reveal the vulnerability behind power, the caution behind strategy, and the lessons behind every betrayal. Through these words, we understand that history is alive. It is shaped by emotions, preserved in memory, and carried forward through careful reflection. Even as empires rise and fall, the human story, the struggle between trust and betrayal, ambition and wisdom, remains constant. The letters of Julius Caesar remain timeless. They whisper across centuries, offering guidance, warning, and reflection. They are a reminder that ambition, loyalty, betrayal, and morality are inseparable from leadership. Rome, now silent beneath the stars, carries these lessons within its memory. And the world, forever influenced by Caesar's life, death, and words, continues to learn that history is not just about empires and battles. It is about human nature, choices, and the enduring echoes of wisdom. Even as the Roman Empire faded and new civilizations rose, the whispers of Caesar's letters remained, teaching, warning, and inspiring all who would listen. The story of Julius Caesar is not confined to ancient Rome. Throughout history, leaders have faced the delicate balance of ambition and loyalty, trust and betrayal. From Renaissance princes navigating court intrigue to modern politicians grappling with alliances and public perception, the lessons Caesar left behind remain relevant. His letters, carefully preserved and studied, serve as a blueprint to anticipate human behavior, to temper ambition with prudence, and to understand the fragile foundations of loyalty. The Ides of March, a day etched in history, continues to echo as a cautionary tale. Caesar's experience teaches that leadership is not just strategy, it is psychology. Understanding the hearts and minds of allies and rivals alike is as crucial as any army or decree. Modern leaders, consciously or unconsciously, reflect on these lessons. The importance of foresight, the need for careful trust, the consequences of betrayal, and the power of legacy. Through Caesar's letters, we learn that leadership is a human endeavor, fraught with emotion, risk, and moral responsibility. Betrayal, as witnessed in the Ides of March, is universal and timeless. It teaches that ambition can blind even the wisest, that trust is precious yet fragile, and that history is shaped as much by human choices as by armies and laws. The letters remind us that betrayal leaves echoes far beyond the moment, impacting empires, influencing successors, and inspiring reflection for centuries. In every culture and era, the lessons remain. Trust wisely, act with foresight, and understand the hearts of those around you. The letters of Julius Caesar are remarkable not only for their strategy, but for their emotional depth. We feel his anxiety, his hope, his foresight, and his awareness of mortality. This emotional resonance allows readers across centuries to connect with history personally, to understand that even the greatest figures faced human fears, doubts, and vulnerabilities. Through these letters, history transforms from dates and battles into the living story of human nature itself. Caesar's life and words act as a bridge, linking the ancient world to the present, the personal to the political, and ambition to consequence. The letters whisper lessons still relevant today. How power should be balanced with prudence, how loyalty should be earned and safeguarded, and how even small decisions can ripple through time. History, through these words, becomes a dialogue. One generation learning from another, understanding not only events but the human hearts behind them. Legacy is more than monuments, coins, or battles. It is the influence left behind, the lessons preserved for those who follow. Julius Caesar's letters are his enduring voice, guiding and warning, reminding us of the delicate interplay between human ambition and moral responsibility. Through the Ides of March, the civil wars, and the rise of Augustus, we see that even death cannot silence wisdom, and even betrayal cannot erase insight. The whispers of Caesar's letters continue through time, in libraries, in the study of historians, in the reflections of leaders. They speak of foresight, strategy, caution, and human emotion. Every reader senses the weight of history in those fragile parchments, a constant reminder that human choices are powerful and enduring. And in these letters, Caesar lives on, not as a man of flesh, but as a voice in history, guiding all who would listen. Rome, the empire Caesar shaped and loved, sleeps beneath the stars. Its streets echo with footsteps of the past. Its monuments whisper stories of ambition, betrayal, and human emotion. The letters of Caesar, once warnings to a man in danger, have become timeless teachers for all generations. History has completed its cycle. From life to death, from betrayal to lesson, from empire to enduring wisdom. The story ends not with silence, but with reflection on the power of trust, the fragility of loyalty, and the eternal influence of human choice. As we close this journey through the life, letters, and legacy of Julius Caesar, we remember that history is never passive. It lives, whispers, and teaches through letters, through actions, and through memory. Caesar's life reminds us that greatness is fragile, that betrayal is inevitable, and that the lessons of the past are the compass for the present and future. In the quiet of the night, as Rome sleeps, the whispers of Caesar endure, eternal, guiding, and profoundly human. Even as centuries pass, even as empires rise and fall, the letters of Julius Caesar continue to teach, warn, and inspire. They remind us that human ambition is timeless, that trust and betrayal are eternal, and that the choices we make echo far beyond ourselves. History sleeps, yet its whispers never fade. And Julius Caesar, through his life, his letters, and his legacy, remains among the eternal voices of the past, forever speaking to the present, and guiding all who are willing to listen.